welcome. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Arnie, for sort of inviting me on here to talk. And really, I'm kind of just going to start off with the idea of why I created co-produced care. Just bear with me because I kind of go through the thought process a little bit. But yes, my name is Sophie Chester-Glynn. I am a director of care services in the Southwest, mainly around the BNSSG area. If people don't know, BNSSG, Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire. And also I'm doing a PhD at Bristol University. But leading up to doing my PhD, I actually did a social care master's at Cardiff University. And one of the things that struck me was that there was a lot of policy and law and history around social care that I wasn't aware of, that I didn't know. And having worked in the sector for many years, supporting people in supported living, residential, older people, people with mental and learning disabilities, I was just conscious how much was going on in the legal and policy world, which we could or maybe couldn't impact, but there was actually maybe no way of people really understanding or knowing what was going on and how we could impact policy, and also to challenge where we couldn't. So that got me thinking, how would I have those discussions around the issues around care law, social care with my colleagues that I work with, in a very helpful way, not being condescending, sharing a conversation. I was thinking, how do I almost democratize the conversation around social care, which seemed at the time back in 2019 and before that, because the idea for this came up before that. How could I get more people involved in policy making? Because actually there were consultations coming out that people could reply to and put their view to, but it was how they would get the time, get the understanding, and get that real input. So that's why I set about setting up co-produced care. And the idea was to, with my access to care workforce and the local area providers, I could then help mobilize them to respond to consultations that affected the work that we do. So we started to do that. One of the first consultations, I'll put up a slide actually that might help. One of the first consultations was one to do with the Mental Capacity Act. So the Mental Capacity Act was being reformed, it was being changed, and bear with me a second while I just share my screen. Sharing everything, there we are. Hopefully you can see that. And the whole idea of this was the code of practice was being changed. So it's being updated. In health and social care, we use the Mental Capacity Act every single day because as people that we support, sometimes there are doubts about their capacity, and we have to make an assessment locally in our services, in what we do to help support people, protect people, and also help them live safely and independently as possible. So we do come across this piece of legislation, we use it a lot, but of course we weren't really putting in our ideas of how maybe it needed to be adjusted, how at the time it was just the code of practice that was being changed. So that's when we went out to the sector. We got some barristers and some we interviewed them, we videoed what they thought about the changes and to get some interest around the change. And we managed to do a joint consultation. We did a few webinars, and that was fantastic to know that we could get people who normally wouldn't maybe have the time or the capacity to really engage in these consultations, to have their views put forward to policymakers, but also to ignite, if you like, a kind of passion towards wanting to be involved in these type of things. So very interesting to us, but also a little bit challenging for people who wanted to who weren't really interested in it. So that's where we started to do our YouTube, and you'll see at the bottom there some of the people. That's just an example of one of the YouTube videos that we did last year. So we bring together, at the time it was Gillian Keegan, who was the Minister for Social Care, Health and Social Care, and then we got some other thought leaders in the sector to come together and have a discussion about different aspects of the sector. And that was really to build up a bit of a groundswell of interest, a bit of a base, get people interested in what is going on out there, get them almost a little bit agitated about policy making that isn't really affecting them. This is pre-pandemic. When we first started this, obviously, this webinar was a bit later. And then that really did start the ball rolling, because we were able to share clips from that. We were able to get likes, get shares, get people wanting to even come on our channel and talk to us. We've got over 100 videos now. And then from that base, we were then able to ask people if they wanted to take part in consultation responses and do more of that kind of stuff, which was great and got some traction. It did take a lot of work, and I can sort of speak to that as well. But then obviously the pandemic hit, and things like this were really, really positive. And I actually had a manager come up to me recently when I did a talk, and they said, you know, it was really wonderful. Your webinars actually kept us going, because we did, at the time, social care wasn't very well supported during the pandemic, and she felt that really helped them to feel that they weren't on their own. And then on top of that, we also did a few reports locally. One of them you can see, Value and Opportunity, the local adult social care sector. We were talking about trying to get some better understanding of how many people social care actually employs within the local economy. Our local politicians very much interested in how they can bolster the economy, so that's we had to speak that language. So we wrote some reports along those lines, and I'll just stop sharing now. So moving on from that, then when the pandemic hit, we then, as a provider, had those dual hats, one as a provider and one co-produced care, trying to support the care sector, really understanding that the care sector needed to come together during the pandemic. And that's when we started weekly calls with our local area. We had MPs on every week. We had providers, sometimes around about 100 people every week, coming onto a webinar like this on Zoom, talking about how we can support each other before PPE was provided, where we could get PPE, which suppliers had run out, and we all just came together. It was a great opportunity. No charge at all for people to come together and support each other and create that community support. Then, of course, we thought, you know, this isn't sustainable. Obviously, I had Arnie and a few others on this team. We needed to try and make sure that we could sustain co-produced care on its own. So that's when we started applying to places like the Health Foundation and Health Education England, and doing little bits of work really around the care sector. So still doing what we're interested in, whether it was to support workforce training, whether it was to look into how AI can support the sector and find out which groups of vulnerable people aren't being supported by local authorities and how they can reach them. And we managed to sustain ourselves that way. But also we reached out to an organisation called Skills for Care. Skills for Care, they support mainly care managers, but they're branching out now to support more of the sector. They've just released, if you're interested, released a report about the state of the adult social care sector across the UK. That comes out every autumn. Very interesting, but they also are doing more around the social care sector in and of itself. So that's where we started to chair webinars on how we can support the diverse sector that is within social care, and the diverse workforce mainly. So we did a series of webinars on how to be more inclusive, on some of the issues that people were facing, some of the discrimination, on EDI policies, and those were really popular, and that was a commissioned work as well. So it was sort of going from the kernel of an idea of wanting to support the sector, actually supporting the sector, not charging at all for it, but then finding other ways after you've built your network to then say, we've got a fantastic network, we've done some reports already, we've got some skills and experience in this space, especially where the experience is not as as great as it might be, say, in the health sector itself, how can we then take that out to organisations that might fund some of the research that we also love doing, so it matches our vision, our mission, but it also makes sure that we can be sustainable as an organisation. And at the moment, we're working with the local provider association again around workforce and specifically around integration between health and social care. How can we, the local area, support the workforce to make sure that it's trained, it's well paid, it's supported to take on people from hospital and try and lessen the burden of the health that's on the health sector, but also how it can be sustained in and of itself and not lose workforce. So that's what we're doing at the moment. So that's just a little bit of a introduction to what we've done in the past and where we're going in the future. Hopefully that's been helpful, but I'm happy to take any questions, Arnie, if that's what would be helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Sophie. A really interesting bit of experience and a great sort of story to be telling the community about. You know, it's a mix, isn't it, of sort of practical projects, making sure we find those sort of commercial partners in the industry, but that sort of one step at a time of building capacity by the more practical commissions, but then that also developing your relationships with the sector and that ability to grow into a really practical, applied, interactive sort of think tank is a really great success story. I'll give a minute or two in case anything comes through the chat. But one question I would like to broach is, you know, this community is about setting standards for the future about how development and impact based translation of research should look, how the sector can support it, you know, defining something that hasn't existed yet. What do you have any thoughts on how the university system could have supported? What you ideally, if in the future you had done this, you know, 5-10 years in the future, what would be a conversation with the university you feel would be the most sort of positive and useful for enterprise?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, because classically, before I got involved in the work I'm doing now, you'd be approached as a provider from universities very much as kind of knowledge extraction. So you'd be approached because somebody was doing some research and they needed to contact people with learning disabilities, or they were doing another piece of research and they needed to speak to, actually not very often, care workers, but occasionally they wanted to speak to you as a provider. And it's very, I know I'm not the only one to think this, but when you get this, you think, well, this is all very fine and dandy, but we don't get anything from these institutions and we don't get anything from the universities. And what, you know, is useful is when I know that some researchers that I'm involved with now, I'm doing a PhD, is they will go out to the community and maybe give some training just free. They'll just go and say, I'll run a workshop because I am doing a PhD in, I don't know, mental health law, and I'm happy to do that. And that's a lot of what we've done at Co-Produce Care. I don't publicize the fact that I'm also involved with the university, but part of it is trying to open up the academy to kind of like be more inclusive and just offer some of its knowledge, which it could do quite easily for like half an hour for free to the community, so that when you then do go out to ask for research or support, it's not just a kind of, like I said, knowledge extraction from whoever you're interviewing. It's also a more of an equal relationship that you've got in terms of you're giving something back, which doesn't necessarily have to be of monetary value, but the sector always values training, you know, always values some kind of support that's for free. And I definitely think that within universities, there's just a wealth of you know, intellectual knowledge that could be shared with the community, so that they don't feel, you know, as if they're kind of just giving without getting anything back. So I think that's definitely something that I've considered and learned from and recognise now. Yeah.
Great, such an important point. Really fantastic to hear that, because, you know, this is what the community is about. It's understanding the nuts and bolts of how the university is a more positive force in the communities that surround it and are linked into. So that's really, really interesting to hear. I noticed, Bridget, you popped your hand up during the sort of Q&A there.
I did, but I can see that Chris has got a question in the chat. So yeah, he can go first.
Great. So, fantastic. The question in the chat is about what are the sort of products that commercializing, what was it that you can sort of make as tangible as possible that brought income into the organization?
For us, the product, I suppose, was the knowledge and insight that we had into the sector. So we were able to get reports. We were able to do, the reports of the research that we were being asked and paid to do from the Health Foundation, from even Skills for Care asking us to do some work. We were able to do that because we had access to the sector, and because we'd already given that out, our services out and support to them. They were really eager to work with us. So it's I think the contacts that you have, having relationships in those areas which are hard to reach, or that people don't necessarily get access to very easily. They don't know the inroads that, I mean, whether you call it a product or not, but it's definitely a service that you can offer and monetize in that way. And obviously in my sector, it's a hot topic at the moment. It's an area that people don't feel like has enough research, and yet there's quite a lot of interest in it. So I'm able to kind of just match the two really well. I don't know if that helps or not, or if you want to come back with another questions on top of that.
No, really important, and that's a great answer. It's less, this is going to be echoed across lots of disciplines and projects here. It's, as opposed to maybe conventional commercialization, we're not going to have a machine or a pill that's ready to go out to industry, but both that expertise and link to the stakeholders is a really valuable asset. Being able to react to what the gaps are out there, and then be able to provide that is really, really interesting. Bridget, did you have a comment now? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. It's so interesting hearing about your experience and about the work that you've been delivering with co-produced care. I was really interested in the fact that you're doing a PhD at the moment, and I wondered what your reflections are around your own research in the context of the work that you're doing, and whether or not you see those two things as separate, and what are the connections for you. I'd just be really interested to hear your reflections on that. Thank you.
It's a really good question, actually, because I started off doing the Masters in Health and Social Care, in social care law. Then I, created co-produced care because I thought there was a massive gap between sort of the sector's knowledge and the reality of kind of policy making and being involved in legal law change. And then I just felt like I hadn't stopped learning, and I wanted to learn some more. So that's kind of fell into the PhD. I managed to get a scholarship with the AHSS, and that has developed itself. So I definitely do. There's a definite link between what I do in my day job and how I'm learning and understanding things as well. So, for example, we ran a workshop on out of sight, and it was really well attended, and it was streamed online. I think we got like 15,000 views, and really that is looking at people within mental health institutions and the conditions that they're living under, and we had people with lived experience who had been in psychiatric hospitals. We had relatives who had fought for better rights for people on that webinar, and my research now is looking at mental health law through a post-colonial lens and the ideas of otherness and how we treat people differently because of race, and how we, through post-colonial theory and exploring those the theories that come out of that, and also how we treat people differently because of disability within disability law, and really trying to understand how we justify that and whether there's social wrong in any of that. So I do bring that perspective both into the work that I pursue, and also I bring it into my research and where I go with it. So they are definitely connected. So yeah, no, that's a really good point. Thank you
so much. It's so interesting. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Aware of time, Sophie, I know you've got to get on, so we'll say thanks so much for that incredible experience. I'll make sure there's ways to connect with you and see some of the successes and ways that co-produced care grew, go out to the community, and hopefully some connections can help continue to grow that. But again, thank you so much, and I hope you can stay in touch with the community moving forward. It's a really great contribution. We'll move back on now to Bridget. Bridget Seeley of Seeley Associates, that has been working with universities to help multiple projects in different ways in this topic. So it's a really interesting way to see what's been going well, and then where we can help to start to define systems and policies for this. So whenever you're ready, Bridget.
Great, thank you, Arnie. So hi everyone. I recognise some of the names that are here today. So hello to people I know, and welcome to people that I don't know yet. Thank you very much, Arnie, for inviting me today. As Arnie said, I work through my company, so with other colleagues as well, on supporting institutions across the UK with a number of different forms of knowledge exchange. But two of the areas that we've specialised in the last couple of years have been arts, humanities and social sciences commercialisation, and also academic policy engagement. And that has taken the shape of institutional capability reviews, training, project support and coaching and mentoring. And I guess that seeing those two areas, which are often quite separate within institutions, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, has given me some opportunities to reflect on where there are opportunities for policy-related commercialisation opportunities within institutions. I also work with capabilities in academic policy engagement, the Research England funded programme, which is just coming to an end. And also have collaborated and partnered with the Universities Policy Engagement Network. And in addition to that, work really closely with policy stakeholders kind of across from government departments, but through to third sector and think tanks and the like. So in terms of the things that I just wanted to reflect on today, the first one was what links that we might see between policy-focused projects or policy-focused research and commercialisation. I was going to reflect a little on some of the barriers that I've encountered in terms of people's engagement with commercialisation who are coming from that perspective and with that expertise. I'll also reflect on two policy-focused commercialisation ventures that, and just give some observations around what lessons I think that we can take from that. And then finally, I will highlight some opportunity areas that those who are working with researchers might be able to look out for and reflect on. And I'd love to hear everyone's ideas and thoughts and experience on this themselves. So in terms of the kind of the initial reflections that I would give around what the links are between policy-focused projects and commercialisation, I think that first of all, as we know, that if you are developing any form of commercial venture or any income generating venture, there needs to be a problem that you are solving for a client or a user group. And as Sophie's example beautifully illustrated, there are many problems that particularly are located within the policy landscape and within policy context, which researchers help to solve, either by making recommendations around policy or by working directly with policy stakeholders or users themselves. And as such, there's the kind of the bare bones, if you like, to find a kind of a translatable solution to a problem that's out there that may ultimately have some form of value. Often the projects that I see that have a policy focus are ones which are either resourced through researchers' own time and their goodwill, or as Sophie illustrated, the goodwill of the partners that they're working with, or they are financed through things like impact accelerator funding, and therefore kind of are ultimately quite limited in terms of their sustainability. Again, as Sophie's example illustrated, many of the kind of research outputs, so that might be know-how, that might be databases that you create, it might be the data that you have access to or the groups that you have access to, will have some form of intellectual property value. And many of the ones that we see being implemented within policy research projects do have that value. Again, using Sophie's example, those that are working on policy-related problems, policy-related research, are often working really close to market. So they're often working really closely with users, and therefore have an understanding in quite a detailed way what the value is of their research, what the value is of their know-how, and therefore have, I suppose, a platform on which to build in terms of commercial understanding. But what's the flip side of that kind of opportunity? That there are the inherent challenges that I'm sure everyone here today will be familiar with to a greater or lesser extent. So I think one of the main things that I have observed working with policy-focused researchers for many years is that they are inherently trained to question and to challenge, and many will have inherent anxieties and concerns around the bigger picture within higher education that they can see commercialisation being a part of, namely the marketisation of higher education, for example. And those concerns can either hold an individual back in engaging with this, or can prevent others from engaging with it because of fear of going against the broader culture within a department, within a research group, for example. Many of the users and the clients that these ventures might be focused on are often cash-strapped. They're the third sector, local authority sectors, and therefore there may be issues in terms of sourcing revenue. Within institutions themselves, my experience has been that often universities are configured in such a way that commercialisation and policy support, where those teams exist, are often quite separate, and therefore those kind of interconnections and overlaps that ventures such as Sophie's have developed and capitalised upon may not always be seen. They may remain invisible. And then similarly, there can be a real lack of confidence and awareness, which within the arts and humanities research community and social science community around this, which partly links back to my first point on this slide, but is also about other things to do with not feeling that they have the language, not feeling that they have the skills to undertake this form of work. So, and I suppose the last thing I would say is that it's also about there not necessarily being a visibility of people who've done this kind of work before in areas which are recognisable to them. And that's what's been fantastic about initiatives like Aspect, which has really kind of platformed the good practice that universities are doing, and therefore making people feel slightly less isolated in terms of their own experience. So to that end, I'm just going to highlight two examples. So the first is Sheffield Hallam University, which has collaborated with a community interest company called Sonnet Impact. And they, as a consultancy, they provide advisory services to organisations that want to improve business performance and also social impact. And Sheffield Hallam University has an outstanding track record of undertaking policy-related research, including evaluation for multiple levels of the policy system, so at a local level, national level and international level. And they are working both in terms of an advisory capacity to that organisation, but also as a body of knowledge that Sonnet can draw upon for the benefit of its clients. And so therefore this is kind of an example, I suppose, of something between a spin out and something between and a service which is delivered as part of kind of normal consultancy and contract research, and really illustrates the benefit of working in partnership. The second example that I wanted to give was a researcher based who did their PhD at TU Delft, and I guess similar to Sophie's story, Ekem Tam was someone who had a rich practice-based experience and brought that together with her research expertise to develop a consultancy called Play the City, which advises governments on how to better integrate their communities, their stakeholders in the planning process in order to make planning more effective. And I think that the things that I would take away from this are around the benefit of drawing upon those researchers within your institutions that have some form of practice-based knowledge, who understand the markets that they're working in, who understand what value they bring. So in terms of opportunity areas, I think that Sophie's example, as Arnie rightly said, really illustrates the benefits of a mixed revenue model. So things where you are selling or kind of providing value to people who have greater disposable budgets, perhaps within the private sector, but then offering other forms of services which may be either subsidised or maybe actually free for those that can't afford it. And I can give some more examples of those sorts of case studies in the conversation that follows if helpful. Working in partnership is really important. That might be within the institution itself, or as in the case of Sonnet Impact, working with partners that have the infrastructure to support that kind of engagement with clients. Then practice-based disciplines, I think particularly within the arts and humanities and in the creative industries focus panels, so things like filmmaking, things like architecture, things like graphic design. All of these disciplines lend themselves quite practically to either working with stakeholders to deliver benefit, or to developing products and services. And I can give some more examples, for example, in relation to Ekimtam, that our sister company, a community interest company called Fabian's Film, is doing with Play the City at the moment with Plymouth University. I think these two examples illustrate the fact that there is not a one-stop shop in terms of what career stages will be interested. And so, as with Sophie's example, again, PhD students can be a really fertile ground to work with in terms of developing commercialisation opportunities, either because they bring that perspective of a previous practice-based career, or because they are they have been brought through a different system of higher education research. And then finally, I just wanted to make the point that in order to kind of overcome some of those silos in terms of either disciplinary thinking or in terms of professional services thinking, using things like coaching techniques to expand the imagination of what's possible, but also things like design thinking can really help researchers to and also professional services to understand what might be possible. So that brings my comments to a close, and I guess I would leave with the question of what opportunity areas you're seeing within your institutions or across into the sectors that you're working with. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Bridget. What a full and great run through of really technical side of how we're going to support these projects year after year and normalize this process. You've just to give the chat a moment. Oh, there's one question straight away. How does a policy support group look like within any research institution? What is their role? Which is a really interesting one, and maybe leads into what my question was going to be anyway. You referenced a couple of bits there, both the revenues or models and the nature of it itself is not going to be the same each time. There's still going to be work with each project to work out the correct partner, the correct commercialization sort of model and route and ways to scale up. But as you've seen a few of these successes, and we are talking about co-designing the sort of structures here within the sector to start to formalize that, do you see things starting to blend over different projects? Do you have an idea of maybe research area types or types of commercialization starting to be where this sort of platforms could start to be developed?
I think so, and I'll come to Raj's question as well, because in some respects it relates. I suppose I would just say again the importance of breaking down some silos in terms of within institutions. So it might be that it's about kind of regularly having a conversation with your commercialization colleagues if you're working on the policy support side, or vice versa if you're working on a different side of things. I think that Raj asked about what policies, so a policy support group, and I'm assuming he means a policy support service. But I think that that differs vastly from institution to institution. They can be a fully formed institute, as you have at Bath or at Nottingham, for example, or it can be an individual who's delivering it alongside lots of other support areas in relation to knowledge exchange. So, but UPenn can be a good place to find out who's working in your own institution to deliver that support service. They have contact points on their website for their membership. So, and going back to your point, Arnie, I do think that there's a lot of scope within I suppose if I was to think about specific pathways, things like those with expertise in evaluation are areas that there are a lot of more kind of commercializable pathways. So there's a great example from America where a researcher, again working more on the political science side, policy evaluation side, has created a venture which has been running since 2002 and has involved over 600 academics internationally to support evaluation in global South countries in particular. I think also collaborations between policy-related researchers and computer sciences and data scientists, where who are working, say, at the interface with GovTech or government technology, because that then gives you a pathway not only into kind of third sector, public sector client bases, but also private sector clients, so things like educational technology and those sorts of things. And I guess the other thing I would say is that sometimes there's a kind of, and I think Sophie's example illustrated that a little bit, and Sonnet illustrates this, that there may be both in, as well as a kind of a mixed revenue model that these sorts of ventures can offer, there's also a mixed impact model in the sense that they may be having an impact at a kind of a user at a user end through a particular intervention that they are monetizing, but they may also be advising government and advocating, as Tay has just mentioned in the chat. They may be influencing government through things like inquiries and select committees or all-party parliamentary groups and that kind of thing. So, so then there are this form of knowledge exchange can open up multiple pathways. So I'm just going to look at Tay's question more specifically. So what do we think about lobbying as areas of activities for academics still affiliated with universities? I think that it is there is a lot of tension with that within that, and there's a lot that could be said and not a huge amount of time, but there's a really fantastic model called the Honest Broker, which was developed by an American researcher called Roger Peekle. I can never pronounce it correctly. I'll just put it into the chat. And he has a kind of a grid or a framework which allows people to analyze where they see themselves within the kind of the policy spectrum as someone who is influencing, advocating, informing, and it allows people to critically reflect on where their position is, because there are a lot of tensions around that in terms of what your institution might be comfortable with you doing, what you might be comfortable doing, and what kinds of things that might expose you to if you are becoming a lobbyist as opposed to an academic who's informing policy.
Great, thanks so much. And really, really interesting topic to carry on in the community as a front for a conversation. And so as someone was involved in a community interest company called Co-Produce Care, where we actively sought new stakeholder groups to be involved in policy processes, I think there's a great opportunity for policy-focused academics to use their expertise in engaging the right communities and making sure that voices are authentically heard, but then how to balance that with, quite rightly, more controversial conversations about politics and lobbying when it's not so purely based on advocacy is a longer-term conversation here. And I think feeds into what will definitely be one of the sessions in the new year about metrics and recognition of success. How do you translate the plans and markers for success in any venture that's got social impact as a goal as opposed to pure financial return. But then this question of policy and advocacy, how do we balance that right so that lots of missions get ticked off and people are happy, but there's the aversion of risk and making sure that the institutional checks and balances are there too. Just conscious of time now, because we do want to try and finish by 11. Bridget, thank you so much for that contribution. Really fantastic experience and really great conversation already started there. So that's absolutely great value for the community. We'll make sure there's ways to connect with you coming out through the community anyway, but hopefully you can also be an active member and be involved in some of the conversations moving forward and share the success as it grows. And we, as a group, try to formalize systems and best practice here to make sure that those successes are shared across the sector.